Next on Unsolved Mysteries. Witnesses say veteran rider Shelley Malone was trampled by her own horse. Her family believes it was all a cover-up for murder. Phone calls, threatening messages, and violence. A husband and wife are terrorized in their own home. After a 7-year-old girl is strangled to death,
Dave, call the police!
Her grieving parents must stand trial for her murder. And the war in Vietnam separates a father and a son for nearly 20 years. Our team is standing by. Perhaps someone watching can help solve one of these cases. Perhaps it's you. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. Just outside the Plains, Virginia. Paramedics rushed to a remote meadow. 37-year-old Shelley Malone, an accomplished horsewoman, has been badly injured in a riding accident. As paramedics struggled to save Shelley's life, her boyfriend, George Carhart, and 2 other friends can only stand by helplessly and watch. One of them, Erica Stumvall, is the only witness to the accident. She reports that Shelley's horse stepped on her and kicked her repeatedly. One blow was apparently powerful enough to rupture Shelley's heart. She died later that day. According to the coroner, it was an accidental death. People in horse country tend to accept occasional accidents as part of their lives. But not Shelley's family. They believe that she was murdered.
I know that that accident is most improbable, if not impossible. In an open field, for a horse she loved and loved her, to step on her squarely on the chest after he had thrown her off, this is impossible.
To Shelley's family, it seemed an impossible scenario for such an experienced rider. Shelley had been around horses since she was a young child.
Shelley was born loving horses. When she was 6 or 7, she told me she was going to marry a horse when she grew up. So she never ever lost her interest in horses.
Shelley rented a small house in the country, a perfect place to stable her 2 horses. At the time, she was dating George Carhart, who lived in New York and came down frequently to visit.
Here you go. Move your chin. There you go.
However, Shelley's mother claims that after 2 years, Shelley had had enough of George Carhart.
The relationship was strained. She had relayed to my husband and myself that she was bringing this relationship to a close.
2 days before she died, Shelley allegedly had a romantic encounter with a local attorney. Shelley's family believes George Carhart found out about that affair when he came to visit that final weekend.
Carter and I are gonna go chop some firewood, and we'll have dinner when you guys get back.
Okay, great.
Okay?
Sounds good.
On Sunday afternoon, Shelley went riding with Erica Stumvall. George Carhart and Carter Wiley, Erica's boyfriend, stayed behind at the house. Erica has issued only one official statement about the day's events, a written document she prepared and delivered to the police. These are selected portions of her statement.
We alternately walked, trotted, and galloped the horses through several fields and trails. We were approximately 100 yards into a new field we had just entered. We were walking the horses side by side to cool them down. Unexpectedly, both horses spooked or started. I was thrown and fell off to the left of my horse. I was not seriously injured. I sighted Shelley about 30 feet away.
Shelley!
The horse stepped on her legs, face, and head, kicking her head as he did so in an apparent attempt to get away. As the horse moved away from her, I immediately ran to her.
Shelley! Shelley!
I checked her pulse and looked in her mouth to see if there were any obstructions. I noticed her left cheek was turning purplish blue, which I assumed was the result of the horse stepping on her face.
I promise. I'll be back as soon as I can, all right? I promise.
Fearful of a head injury as a result of seeing the horse kick her in the head, I then concluded that the best thing to do was try to seek medical help.
Erica says that she got lost trying to find help. It would be an hour and a half before paramedics finally reached Shelley. Later, George Carhart called Shelley's mother in Florida.
When the phone rang, he said, Shelley's had an accident. I expected him to say she slipped and broke an arm or a leg or something. And I said, what kind of an accident? And he said, she's dead.
Shelley's family left Florida and hurried to Virginia. They say they were shocked by what they saw at the morgue. Shelley looked like she had been in a fight rather than a riding accident.
One of the clerks there showed us a Polaroid of my daughter's face. It was so battered and so swollen, her eyes were black and blue, that I didn't recognize her.
The coroner ruled Shelley's death an accident, but other events made Shelley's family even more suspicious. 2 days after Shelley's funeral, family members visited her house. George Carhart was there.
There was a pickup truck backed up to the front porch, and there was some large pieces of my sister's furniture on there, and they were moving stuff out and loading bags up with her clothes and her belongings.
Shelley's mother says she argued with Carhart about Shelley's belongings.
And he said, all of her clothes will go to charity. And I said, well, you have made no arrangements to do anything of the kind. And as these black garbage bags were going down the stairs with her belongings in them, I was pulling them back up the stairs, and we were like having a tug of war with these bags.
Hey, here's one. Another one.
Apparently, the clothes Shelley was wearing when she was killed had been tossed into the dump. Shelley's family was unable to find them. And then there was Shelley's truck. Her family found what they believed to be bloodstains inside. They asked a Florida detective to test them.
I did a field test to tell whether or not it was human blood, and the field test was positive. From the angle where the blood was on the passenger seat, it appears that it came from a head wound.
Shelley's family took the truck back to the plains. They turned it over to local authorities who performed routine blood tests. However, the sheriff's office claimed that they didn't have the budget to do DNA comparisons. What would DNA tests have revealed? If the blood in Shelley's car was her own, it could suggest that someone used the truck to move Shelley. But according to the official scenario, only paramedics have moved Shelley after her fatal injury, and they used an ambulance. Shelley's family has tried to keep pressure on authorities with newspaper ads, letters, and phone calls. They want a full investigation, which they believe will prove Shelley was murdered.
I can only think that an argument came about between Shelley and George or Shelley and Carter Wiley. I don't know which of the two. I think it wasn't a planned thing, but I think one of them struck her and killed her, or felt that they had killed her, or felt that they had maimed her in a very serious way. And I think the rest of the scenario that we've been told is simply that, a scenario.
The element of the story that raises questions in my mind are a horse stepping on its rider in an open field. It's hard to imagine a horse intentionally or accidentally stepping on someone in that situation.
I've talked to medical men who say a man with a big fist could strike a girl weighing 104 pounds and just with the force of his hand sever that ventricle So once that had happened and she was unconscious or dead, what could they do? So you take the shoe off of the horse, ram it onto a 4x4, and then with all the force you have, plant a hoof print over the heart.
The case of Shelley Malone is considered closed by local authorities. The Sheriff's Department in Fauquier County, Virginia, issued a statement in response to our story. Quote, Ms. Malone's death has been investigated and reviewed by several agencies, including the Virginia State Police. All conclude the death is accidental, end quote. If you have any information regarding this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next, when a family is victimized by threats and harassment, everyone is a suspect, even the family members themselves. Massillon, Ohio. Dorothy and Bill Wacker had lived in this small Ohio town for most of their 48 years together. They were quiet, unassuming people who tended to mind their own business, hardly the type to draw the wrath of an unseen enemy.
Bill?
But one day, Bill and Dorothy found their house completely ransacked.
The Sheriff's Department? Yeah, this is Bill Wacker.
It was the third incident in a cycle of harassment and attacks that would last nearly a decade.
Well, as far as all this harassment is going on, which to me it looks like it's trying to force us to move. Why should I move? Why should we move? Why should we be forced out by a kook?
Understandably, Bill and Dorothy were alarmed when they first came under attack. But even after years of continuing harassment, they still didn't know why they had been singled out. All they knew for sure was that the incidents showed no signs of stopping. 6 months after the house was ransacked, Dorothy was home by herself.
Come on in.
She let a young man come in to use the phone.
Anybody come to the door, we didn't believe the worst of them, so we did what we had to do. If they wanted help or anything, well, we always helped them.
Right off South Erie.
He was talking on the phone, but like I say, I didn't pay no attention to him. I don't listen to people's conversations when they use the phone.
Thanks.
And he said thanks very much, and that's the reason I thought he'd left. The next thing I remember, I woke up on the floor, tied up. You know, he hit me in the head and he hit me alongside the jaw. And finally, when I got over towards the kitchen window and there, it was open, and I got the neighbors to hear me over there, and they come over.
Bill returned home to find his house swarming with police. Luckily, Dorothy was not seriously injured.
She's all right, okay?
When he searched the house, Bill discovered that some personal items were missing. The assailant had taken a .22 caliber revolver, an antique watch, a camera, and a radio scanner. He left behind a cryptic message scrawled in crayon.
The words were cheaper, but will do. There's no connotation, there's no rationale behind that message that we can understand.
The suspect never reappeared, but surprisingly, most of Bill and Dorothy's missing possessions did. Bill says that about 4 months after Dorothy was assaulted, the gun turned up on the front porch. And then, one by one, the other items also reappeared.
I couldn't figure it out. I still can't figure it out why it was brought back. If somebody was steal something, normally they're going to, if they don't have any use for it, they're going to sell it to somebody else. And it just looked like this stuff was laid around till it was brought back.
This is extremely unusual, if not very rare. In all my years in law enforcement, I have never known of a gun being returned after it was stolen.
Next, the harassment began to include phone calls.
Hello? Sometimes he wouldn't say anything. He'd just breathe real deep. And then the next time, he says, I'll knock you in the head and lay you out and do this to you and do that to you.
Who is this?
I was angry and I was scared.
They've changed their telephone number several times, and whoever this is that's harassing them has come up with the number. How they found it, I have no idea.
According to Bill and Dorothy, the calls never let up and the mysterious assailant moved closer.
Bill, what's that?
I don't know, but I'm darn sure going to find out.
Bill?
But all this guy going to dawn.
I don't want you going out there, Bill. Bill?
I'd rush outside. Never see a thing, never hear a thing. Never hear a car. Never hear a noise whatsoever. We got to the point that we figured that we needed some kind of security light outside in the front, which we put up.
From time to time, handwritten notes showed up on the Whackers' front porch. Some were threatening, others simply mocking. All were alarming. But at least Bill and Dorothy finally had tangible evidence to show to the police.
Bill?
It would appear that the person that wrote these notes may have been using the opposite hand from what they're normally used to writing with. That whoever printed them went to some pains to try to conceal their normal handwriting or printing techniques. To date, we have found no latent fingerprints or any other foreign material on the evidence that's been submitted.
Finally, the mysterious assailant became violent. This time, Dorothy was raced to the hospital with skull lacerations. Desperate to find a witness, police once again searched the neighborhood.
Do you have any idea who may be prowling around the Whacker residence?
We've interviewed the neighbors on numerous occasions, and none of the neighbors have yet been able to provide us with any information which would lead us to believe that there was a person there. Nobody has ever seen anybody, that's very frustrating to us in our efforts.
With no suspects and no clues, the lead detective had to consider every possible scenario. He had a straight talk with Dorothy.
He says, I'm going to ask you a question, but he said, I don't want you to take it the wrong way. He says, do you think your husband could have done this? And I said, no way. I said, he wouldn't do something like that.
He says, we got to explore all possibilities. She says, no. Which, why should I do something like that after being married 48 years, you know?
The problem with this is you cannot identify the motive. You can't identify the reasons behind the activity that's going on out there.
After years of harassment, Bill and Dorothy decided to stake out their own house. Bill hid in a trailer parked in the driveway. Across the street, his sons-in-law, Dan and Clay, watched from a van. Clay's wife, Kathy, stayed with Dorothy in the house. The family communicated by walkie-talkie.
Yeah, it's all quiet in here.
They waited for almost 4 hours. Around 10:30 p.m., they decided to end their surveillance.
And all of a sudden, we heard bump, 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 bump. I said, something on the front porch.
No, I can't see anything.
The intruder had somehow found a blind spot in the stakeout.
And a note on it.
Never saw it come from anywhere.
The scrawl was all too familiar. The note simply read, "Get the message?"
Come on, let's go in the house.
Violent assaults, threatening notes, upsetting calls. Bill and Dorothy remain as mystified today as when their troubles first began.
If he's not harassing us or threatening us, he'll probably be doing it to somebody else to get his kicks. I think that's what it boils down to. He gets a heck of a big kick out of it.
If you have any information regarding this unusual case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next,
Jacqueline!
the tragic story of a couple charged with the murder of their own daughter. It was just an ordinary Saturday morning in Midlothian, Illinois. David DeWallaby and his son Davey were up early. 2 hours later, David's wife, Cynthia, went to wake up their 7-year-old daughter, Jacqueline.
Hey, Dave! Have you seen Jacqueline?
At first, David and Cynthia assumed that Jacqueline was out playing with friends in their neighborhood. Jacqueline was Cynthia's daughter from a previous marriage and had been legally adopted by David. After thoroughly searching the house, David took his son with him to look around the neighborhood.
Hey, Paula, you haven't seen Jacqueline around here, have you?
No, not this morning, I haven't.
I had checked 2 or 3 homes, and then we went out in my truck and we drove around the neighborhood, going to friends who lived a little further down and just, driving around the blocks and getting out of the truck, looking in backyards with our swing sets.
Jacqueline! Jacqueline!
Jacqueline?
I started to get more nervous. Started to walk quicker and call louder. When I went back into Jacqueline's room, and I noticed that her comforter was missing, and that it was very unusual for her comforter to be missing because she doesn't play with it.
Did you find her?
No, we've been every house in the neighborhood. No one's seen her.
I've been through the whole house. She's not there. Her quilt's gone. You know where that is?
No.
All right, well, I'm gonna go check the Morgans, okay?
I was cutting through my yard to look into my neighbor's backyard, and that's where I noticed the window.
The window to the basement of their home was broken. It appeared that someone had used it to get into their house.
Dave, call the police.
Is this a picture of Jacqueline?
Yes.
Do you mind if I hold on to it?
No, it's
Within hours, their home was swarming with police and FBI agents. They assumed that Jacqueline had been kidnapped and set up equipment to record any ransom demands. But no one called.
Would you like to sit down or something?
No, it's fine. What else? What else?
What time did you get up this morning?
Although investigators viewed the case as a possible kidnapping, they also looked at Cynthia and David as suspects in their daughter's disappearance.
Your wife was still asleep.
She was still sleeping.
Isn't that kind of strange? I mean, I know...
It was hard answering their questions because telling the police that you woke up around 8 isn't good enough. They wanted us to get it as close as possible, and so we were forced to try to get really close to times when really all that was on our mind was Jacqueline.
I didn't want them asking me questions, although you answer them as you're walking past them and pacing, but it was just totally chaotic. And the repeated questions of what did you do in the morning, it seemed so senseless because I said, where's my daughter? Just find Jacqueline. That's all I wanted them to do.
Yes.
All of her
Yes,
girlfriends?
we did all this.
I know they'll tell you that they felt as though they were being harassed and being accused. I think any reasonable individual's got to understand that you're in the house, your daughter's missing, you're a suspect.
Investigators directed their attention to the broken basement window.
Shards of glass on the towel rack.
At first, they believed it had been smashed by someone on the inside, someone trying to make it look like an intruder had broken into the house.
People call you David.
Yes.
Are you over 21 years old?
Yes.
On Sunday, the day after Jacqueline disappeared, David agreed to take a polygraph test at FBI headquarters in Chicago.
Did you help her plan with anyone to cause Jacqueline's disappearance?
No.
Please remember.
I asked the agent next to me if I passed, and he said I passed with flying colors.
3 days passed, and police still had no leads.
I remember the days were very long. The days seemed like weeks. And then the night, Cindy and I would be in the room trying to imagine where she might be. I just remember that's all that was on our minds, is trying to figure out where she could be.
Once again, they asked David to take a lie detector test.
Of course, I wanted to know why and what was wrong with the first one. And their answer was something to the effect that the state likes to use their own.
The results from the second test were inconclusive. The report said that David was an uncooperative subject. According to David, the agent said that to set up the polygraph machine, he wanted David to answer only yes to test questions.
In other words, he wanted me to lie so he could see how his tests would result in me lying. And I said, okay, and like the second question he asked me was, did you kill your daughter? And he wanted me to answer yes to that. And I told him I can't do it. And he got into a little argument where he was turning red in the face, and he said, we have to do it this way. You have to, lie. And I don't mind telling him my name is not Dave DeWallaby, and I don't mind some things, but I told him I can't say yes to a question like that.
After the second test, police interrogated David for 5 hours. Finally, an officer interrupted.
We think we found Jacqueline.
She okay?
I'm sorry, she's dead.
I was convinced that these police were lying to me about my daughter's death as a last-ditch effort to try to get me to confess to something.
You liars.
When David returned home and saw his wife and mother, he knew that the police had told him the truth.
Cindy was on the couch crying, and I ran up to her and I asked her if it was true, and she said, yes, we lost our daughter. God, no. The feeling was, well, it can't be, like, it's impossible. It's just too much of a bizarre nightmare, to be real, and you feel like it must be a dream. It was hard to accept, very hard.
First thing I said was, who did it? Who would do this? I can't explain how I felt because I think I went into shock because I just laid on the couch crying.
4 days after Jacqueline disappeared, her body was discovered in a vacant field in the next town. At the scene were the comforter from her bed, her nightgown, and a 26-foot length of rope that had been wrapped around her throat. An autopsy was unable to determine when Jacqueline had been murdered. 7 days after her disappearance, she was laid to rest. The investigation now included the Illinois State Police, the Midlothian Police, and the police in Blue Island, where Jacqueline's body had been found. For 2 months, they collected evidence and built a case against the DeWallabys. Finally, David and Cynthia were charged with Jacqueline's murder. For a parent, there is nothing worse than discovering that your child has been murdered, except perhaps discovering that you've been charged with the crime. When we come back, the surprising verdict in the trial of David and Cynthia DeWallaby. At the time of their arrest, the DeWallabys stood alone against the media, the police, and many of their friends and neighbors. All were convinced that the couple had murdered their daughter. The DeWallabys continued to insist that the real killer was still on the loose. David and Cynthia went on trial for the murder of their daughter, Jacqueline.
All right.
The prosecution built its case largely on circumstantial evidence.
Could you tell us what the car looked like, sir?
It appeared to be a dark-colored, late model.
One prosecution witness, a transit worker named Everett Mann, picked David DeWallaby out of a photo lineup. He claimed that he saw a man with a prominent nose, like David's, in a parked car near the site where Jacqueline's body was discovered.
Did you make out any features of that person?
Yes, it was the nose structure.
Could you tell whether it was a man or a
Everett Mann's claim was that from 75 yards away, 3/4 of the length of a football field, on a moonless night in a dark parking lot, he saw a profile of a nose structure that resembled David DeWallaby's nose structure. I've been there, the police have been there. Every rational person knows that that's a physical impossibility.
The photo spread that Everett Mann was shown was of 5 photographs, all of white males, all frontal. He saw the man in the parking lot from a side view. Also, David DeWallaby's photograph was 30% larger than the other 4 photographs in the spread. So therefore, by definition, David DeWallaby's nose was the largest. if he saw a very large nose, he picked out David DeWalby's photograph because that was the largest nose in the photo spread. It didn't mean that he saw David DeWalby.
Another central issue in the prosecution's case was the broken basement window.
The entire law enforcement investigation in this case was based on a faulty assumption, namely that the basement window had been broken from inside as part of an effort by the DeWalbys to cover up a crime that they had committed. Well, it turned out that they had already arrested and indicted the DeWalbys before the official forensic report came back on the window, which conclusively showed that they had been wrong and that the basement window had indeed been broken from the outside. But by that point, there was no turning back.
The prosecution also questioned whether it was possible for someone to enter the house without disturbing the items that were sitting beneath the window.
I found it very difficult to believe the theory that someone would break in a window in the middle of the night and traverse over a nightstand, a towel rack, a TV tray, makeup, and nail polish, and not disturb anything. It's incredible to imagine someone even kicking in the window and making that kind of racket in the middle of the night, knowing there's people in the home.
To prove that such an entry was possible, David himself shot this video of a neighbor crawling through the window.
The prosecution was telling the judge and the media that if someone were to come in, they would have to step on this towel rack and bend it. So we put the towel rack under the window, and we had my neighbor crawling while we were shooting it with a camera. And what happened is he slid in on his belly, and right before he got to the towel rack, he wedged his foot on the wall and held himself out, hanging off the window ledge. So we proved it to ourselves, and we recorded it so that if there was a chance, we could prove it to others.
I ask that the indictments against David and Cynthia DeWalby be set aside for a lack of evidence.
The DeWalbys never testified on their own behalf. Before closing arguments, the judge addressed attorneys from both sides without the jury present.
It's my position that there is sufficient evidence for David DeWalby's case to go to the jury. As to Cynthia DeWalby, and as a legal matter, I'm ruling that there is insufficient evidence for her case to go to the jury.
The court was adjourned for a while, and we just kept telling David in the hall that he was next and he was next, that this is obviously where the juror's heading also.
Have you reached a verdict in this case?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
The jury deliberated for 3 days on the fate of David DeWalby.
I was really up. I felt for sure we were going to get a not guilty verdict.
Will the defendant please rise?
You know, of course, I'm so anxious. I was trying to read into the judge's eyes, into his reaction of what it could be, but I was getting nothing.
We, the jury, find the defendant David DeWalby guilty of murder in the first degree. We, the jury, find the defendant David DeWalby guilty of concealment of a homicidal death.
I think I went into shock. I wasn't even conscious of anything around me. It was unbelievable. It didn't matter what happened to me at that point, because I really wasn't there, even though I was.
David DeWalby was sentenced to 45 years in the Stateville Maximum Security Prison in Joliet, Illinois. But even as David began serving his sentence, a grassroots movement was being organized by Cynthia and friends of the family to reverse the decision. Their efforts caught the attention of Chicago journalist David Protess. In a series of newspaper articles, he criticized the official investigation.
Well, Carol, the DeWalby trial ended in a split decision because it was a circumstantial case. There was no physical evidence that either...
Later, television reporter Paul Hogan joined Protess in a series of investigative reports.
Our expert says state police evidence technician, whose primary job was to seek out and collect all physical evidence, should have immediately collected and inventoried the glass. Instead, he waited 3 days and then had to retrieve it from a trash basket. He should have collected and...
The news reports shifted public opinion and triggered a surprising turn of events.
He's just about out.
He's just about ready to come out.
Oh, that's great.
No. Yes, we just got the phone call.
The Illinois Court of Appeals unanimously overturned the verdict and dismissed David Dualaby's case. He was released from prison after serving 18 months.
Today's not a day to be bitter or to look back. I'm just looking forward to seeing my family. So maybe in a few weeks or so, once it's sunk in, I might look back and decide what to do next. But what are you going to do?
We're left with the mystery of what happened to Jacqueline, and we wonder all the time what could have happened to her, who could have hurt her. You know, we just want the ability to try to go on, but we want to find out what happened to Jacqueline. You know, we want justice.
What it all boils down to is we lost a precious little girl. And nothing beyond that is as bad as losing Jacqueline. Going to prison, being accused of this crime, it's all bad, but it doesn't compare to losing Jacqueline. So, you know, that was the hardest part of it all, and we keep falling back on the same, on Jacqueline.
Update. After we aired this story, 2 viewers called our phone center with crucial information about a possible suspect in this case. The investigation was reopened. However, no charges have been filed because there is not enough evidence to make an arrest. Nevertheless, these developments led the state of Illinois to officially exonerate David Dualaby for this crime. Next, an immigrant searches for both his father and his son, a journey that lasts more than 50 years. Our next story profiles 3 generations who were separated by the upheavals of war. It's a story that spans more than 50 years and links China, the United States, and South Vietnam. April 1975. Saigon is in chaos as triumphant North Vietnamese soldiers close in. Thousands fight for a chance to flee the country. John Nellis was one of them. Under the cloak of darkness, John and his fiancée, Vivian, climbed into the back of a truck. It was the first step in a harrowing journey they hoped would take them to the United States. As the South Vietnamese government collapsed, its once friendly soldiers turned into enemies.
I was real terrified because I was thinking, will we make it? We thought we got a chance to get out of the country, but we don't know exactly where we're going.
John and Vivian were among the few airlifted to safety as Saigon fell. Eventually, they were able to start a new life in America. John also began a search for the son he left behind in Vietnam and the father he hardly knew. John's father, Melvin Nellis, was an American serviceman stationed in Chongqing, China, just after World War II. He lived there with a Vietnamese woman, and their son, John Nellis, was born in 1946. When John was just 5 years old, his father, Melvin, was shipped back to the United States, leaving John and his mother behind.
Still wish you could come with me.
Because John's father and mother were not married, she could not go to America. Melvin promised to write, but eventually the letter stopped. John never heard from his father again. The following year, John Nellis and his mother moved to South Vietnam.
My mother, she did make a lot of sacrifice for me. She has to spend at least 2/3 of her income to send me to that school.
When John was just 11 years old, his mother took him to the United States Embassy in Saigon.
This is my son, John.
Hello, John. How are you?
There, she obtained a registration document proving that John's father was an American. Some 20 years later, this piece of paper would allow John Nellis to escape from Vietnam. During the late 1960s and early 70s, the war in Vietnam escalated. John's personal life also went through dramatic changes. he met a woman, and they had a baby. They named him Daniel Nellis. But the woman later left John and married an American Marine. They moved to the United States, and John believed they took his son with them.
First of all, I feel a little sad because I lost, just like I lost a son. But I feel happy because he can go to the United States, has a proper education, have a better life, so he doesn't end up like myself.
2 years later, as South Vietnam crumbled, John Nellis would lift off for the United States. The paper his mother had obtained nearly 2 decades before allowed him and his fiancée to board one of the last helicopters out of Saigon. Only later would John learn that his son Daniel was still in Vietnam. Though John had a good life in the U.S., he longed to meet his father Melvin and be reunited with his son Daniel.
If my father and my son watching me right now, I would like to tell them how much I miss them and I love them, and I like to reunite it and see them again.
Update. Thanks to our broadcast, John Nellis learned that his father was retired and living in Tokyo, Japan. John Nellis also found his son.
Oh, he's coming. Oh, this is him.
That's him right there.
Is that
This is a real dream come true, and it's a miracle.
When I saw my dad, I was so excited and very happy. When I looked into his eyes and saw his family, I found happiness.
Now he's with me. I'm gonna do my best, give him a good chance in life and a better future for him, and make up for what he has lost.
Much that is impacted by war is destroyed forever. But in a few cases, persistence and a measure of good luck can ultimately prevail over the destruction.